Want to put together a purse? Okay, let's do it. I have a coffee can, I have a piece of 5/4 board, and I got a scroll saw, so I made a form. I want it to be repeatable. It's waterproof, so that's going to help when I'm wet forming over top of it. It still needs to be shellacked, but that'll come. The other first that I'm doing here is I'm working with a piece of leather that I've never worked with before. This is a like a sienna flat side. It's pre-dyed. It's really lightweight. It's like a 3 ounce. Um, it burnishes very well, but it doesn't have a whole lot of stiffness to it, which you'll see exemplified when I'm trying to use my strap cutter to get through the darn thing. I had to actually start it with a utility knife to get the blade in there and get it ripping. And when I did, the leather itself isn't stiff enough to hold against the side of the strap cutter to use as a guide. So even if you have a straight edge, you're going to wind up with a wavy line. It was a little rough. So keep that into consideration when you're picking your materials or your technique, because I wound up doing away with the strap cutter entirely and just laying it out on a yoga mat and straight edging it because it just got to be too hard to work with. All right, so all the pieces I needed for this were the wet form top side based on that form. I just used a coffee can lid to form that arc, and then the back side to form the lid. And I put a stiffener in there. It's like a piece of 5 ounce and a strap. I also need some little tiny straps for the, like attachments and latches, but I'll cut those out as I need them. My plan was to go ahead and trim that down to a 1 inch size to fit through some rings that I was going to attach to it. So we'll see how that plan works out. Um, I'll use that same coffee can to form the arc for the lid so it matches the bottom. Get some nice uniformity out of it. All right, I got that traced out. Just cut it off. I'm using the razor knife. Just there's no better way to cut an arc and off of a form, and especially with this flimsy stuff. So how I got those edges to match up perfectly, I just put the piece on top, then put a straight edge on it, and just ran it straight up off of the the edge of the front piece so that it kind of matched up. And I decided that since I was going to put that stiffener in there anyway, I might as well make if it's going to be a usable purse, I'd put a card pocket in there. So the bag itself is large enough to accommodate a cell phone standing up on end. But then right near the top, I figured I'd put that little card pocket. And the kicker there is, it really only has to be stitched along the bottom, just underneath where the card's going to float, because the sides are going to be stitched up along the edge lines anyway. So it'll just be a nice long pocket. I'm giving myself about a eighth to a quarter inch space under where I thought I needed the card to land to account for the stitch line. For all the poo-pooers and naysayers out there that are harassing you about your tools, these are my $20 Amazon stitching punches. So I've been using them for about a year now consistently, and I haven't broken a tine or anything. Nothing's been over. They've been working flawlessly. Once I figured out how I was going to close this thing, I was going to put a strap coming off of the top flap and then just a space for it, to a slot to accommodate down on the bottom. On other iterations of this, I've split that strap and tied it off if I wanted a more rustic look. On a pricier model, something more high fashion, I might put, a magnetic closure on it, just to make sure that the thing stays closed and gives it a little more pop of color right in the middle. I'd also rivet that just so I could get some more nuances of color on the front of it, give it a little profile. Line that strap up and outline it with a scroll before I lose the position and I'm not able to find it again. Learn that lesson the hard way. I just run a 4-prong up each side and then use a 2 to work my way around the arc. And the key here, I'm putting a lot of pressure on that strap because I don't want it to move as I'm working my tool out of the leather. That's really a key component. I spent all that time getting things lined up perfectly in alignment. I spent time scratching a stitch line. I don't want to lose it halfway through the process. I need to cut out some small pieces to attach my rings to the side. And I just want to make sure that it's wide enough to accommodate a rivet. I'm using the round end punch. I think these are 1/2-inch straps that I'm cutting out. So I'll round punch both ends, and once I get one in position to the right length, the way I want it, then I'm just going to use it as a template for the other one. That way I'm not having to remeasure and remeasure and remeasure. Get done with this, just poke a couple of holes in it for the rivet, and then I'm using the antique bronze hardware with it, so I have those rings that will accommodate that, and it gives it a little bit of room to maneuver on the side, so I can kind of position the rings out a little bit so that they don't interfere with the top flap, and then I'll attach the shoulder strap to that. Biggest pain in the butt of the day, getting everything lined up, because I cut the tolerances a little tight. I didn't leave myself a lot of overage on the back piece, so I had to pin everything down. And the way I do this to make sure that I don't overrun my other side is I'll lay this thing out on my pounding boards, working around those clips so that it's always laying flat and I'm getting a straight, vertical pound. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll punch in one side of holes and stitch that up, and then I'll work my way around the bottom, stitch that up, then I'll finally be able to put holes in the opposite side, just to make sure everything lines up and it stays where I want it to stay. That way I don't have to keep clips on it the whole time or glue the whole thing down. Standard saddle stitch, and when I get to the end I bring it back about, I don't know, maybe 4 stitch holes to lock it in place, and then I'm sure you saw earlier on, I'm sealing it on the back side with a little heat and then pounding the stitches flat so they don't stand out. In the case of this purse, I opted for a double rivet to make sure if one of them pops, it still maintains the shoulder strap, and I didn't want to lose that. So I put 2 rivets in it. It adds a splash of color and a little bit of accent. In other models that I'll show you, I did the design a little bit differently based off of the same basic shape of the purse. So I'll give you a look at that. That's essentially the finished product right there. I cut that strap out of one solid long piece because I happen to have a clean edge. In cases where you don't have a clean edge, I have some other options for you. Alright, here's a rustic version using those alternative techniques. Rough edges, end cuts off the pethled leather for the flap, tying off instead of rivets. I just rip those things down to about a 1/4 inch and then tie everything off. I wet it down and twist it, and it works like a champ. Great for a Ren Fair possibles bag. Put some fringe on it if it makes you happy. But it's the same basic shape, totally different application. If you want to get really crazy, you can burn it, you can tool it. Just do that before you wet it down, and then form it around your shape. So I showed you one shape that gave you, in this case, 3 different designs, but there's a multitude of things that you could do with it. So I hope you found this kind of useful, and if you have any suggestions, let me know.